Hello, I'm Keith Richards. Apart from being a Rolling Stone, I've been a Fellow of Emmanuel College since 1984. I was Director of Studies in Geography until 1996. Then I became Head of the Department of Geography and Professor, and I retired in 2014. My research has always been about hydrology, water and rivers. I'm going to tell you about some slow research I've been involved in, a long-running project with 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬 and Pat Saunders on the early cartography of the Bengal Basin and what it tells us about the changing river system of that region. The rivers of the Bengal Basin include two of the world's great rivers, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, but there are lots of others, including the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘬𝑗, which is the focus of this talk. The whole region is a complex megafan where these rivers have deposited sediments carried from the uplifting and eroding Himalayas. Rivers on alluvial fans shift around and interact with one another. They deposit sediment as their gradient slackens, and this raises their elevation slightly relative to their surroundings until, in a flood, they overtop their banks and avulse. They jump laterally to reoccupy a nearby lower channel, often one of their own earlier courses. A major example of this is the Brahmaputra itself. Just north of Dhaka, there is an area of slightly higher land, the 𝘰𝘮𝘯𝘯𝘬𝘶 tract. When James Rennell mapped this region for the East India Company in the decade 1775 to 1785, the Brahmaputra flowed east of the 𝘰𝘮𝘯𝘯𝘬𝘶 tract. But when the next survey took place, that was Richard Wilcox in 1828 to 30, it flowed south, west of the tract, and it's been there ever since. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you some images. Let's begin by looking at a Google Earth image to get a sense of the contemporary arrangement of the rivers. If you type Bangladesh into Google Earth's search box, this is what you will see, although I've stripped away all of the detail. You have the Brahmaputra coming around the end of the Garo Hills and flowing due south to join the Ganges. I mentioned the 𝘰𝘮𝘯𝘮 tract a few moments ago. The current river is to the west of that, but as you can see, there's a much reduced old Brahmaputra course to the east of the 𝘰𝘮𝘯𝘮 tract, joining the Meghna to the east of Dhaka. You can also see here the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘮𝘯, quite a large braided river, emerging from the Himalayas, passing the town of 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘮𝘯𝘰, flowing to the north of Rangpur, and then joining the Brahmaputra. I've also marked the town of Dinajpur for reasons which will become obvious later, which seems to be on a southerly directed drainage route with streams that flow south to join the Ganges. This is what it looks like now. This is actually a 2016 image. If I now go back 100 years, here is a survey of India map from 1917 to 1931. It was published in 1931 with various bits of amendment post-1917. But as you can see, it's very much the same as the Google Earth image, at least in outline. There are local variations. The Brahmaputra comes around the east, the west rather, of the Garo Hills and then flows due south. The much reduced Brahmaputra former course, the old Brahmaputra, meanders through to join the Meghna here. This is the Ganges. The 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘮𝘯 again through 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘮𝘯𝘰, north of Rangpur, and Dinajpur is over here to the west. Pretty much the same as the present river system 100 years ago. Go back another 100 years, and Richard Wilcox surveyed the Brahmaputra between 1828 and 1830, and these are the two manuscript sheets that provide his survey data. The northern sheet at its southern edge shows a spur channel leaving the Brahmaputra, and that's where the map marks the route of the old Brahmaputra. But the Brahmaputra continues due south, and Wilcox had it joining the Ganges at the end of this highly braided southerly oriented route. So in 1828, the river, the Brahmaputra, was pretty much what it is today. But if we go back a few more decades, this is what we see. This is Reynolds' map from his Bengal Atlas, published in 1786, but it's all based on a survey from the period 1765 to approximately 1777. Here what you see is the Brahmaputra rounding the Garo Hills and then changing direction, not flowing south but flowing southeast to be east of the Madhepur tract. It's a large river, a braided river of similar scale to the modern Brahmaputra, joins the Meghna, and the combined rivers then go on to the south to join the Ganges, significantly further to the southeast than the present junction between the Brahmaputra and the Ganges. So there's been a major change in the Brahmaputra, but the Teesta, interestingly, also seems to have a major difference. It emerges from the Himalayas and passes 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬, which is here. The towns' names are spelt differently, but when you say them, they sound the same. But after 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬, the Teesta flows to the south. There is a split, it divides, and one of the channels passes through Dinajpur and the other one bypasses it and continues to the south. But both of the channels join the Ganges eventually. There is no major Teesta route to the north of Rangpur joining the Brahmaputra. So there are quite a lot of things going on in the river systems here. The Teesta and the Brahmaputra seem to be doing opposite things. The Teesta backs from a southerly to a southeasterly route, and the Brahmaputra veers from a southeasterly to a southerly route. So, what exactly is going on here? Are these moves in some way connected? Some people definitely think they were connected, that the Teesta flooded in 1787 and delivered so much water and sediment to the Brahmaputra that it caused the latter river to change its course. This might be a feasible hypothesis, but we need to look for some evidence in support of it. There are two archival sources that may be of interest. The first are the East India Company archives. These include a lot of correspondence, and of particular interest is that amongst McDowell, the district collector for Rangpur, Hatch, the collector for Dinajpur, his assistant Hunter, and the Bengal Revenue Board, to which they were responsible. This confirms that the monsoon broke particularly early in 1787 in March, with much rain and high river levels. On the 18th of June, 1787, McDowell wrote about 3 floods in Rangpur and the failure of the first crop that year. And on the 29th of July, he reported dealing with requests for suspension of revenue collection. So there was definitely a severe monsoon, flooding caused by it, and hardship amongst the people. However, on the 2nd of September, McDowell reported a different cause of flooding. He wrote, and I quote, "The sudden and unaccountable shutting up of the channel of the great river Teesta, the water of which has spread itself over the whole of this district, leaving the Dinajpur rivers almost dry. This is the first evidence that the Rangpur district was flooded by an avulsion of the Teesta." McDowell wrote to the Revenue Board again the following year on the 7th of May 1788 to explain the lost revenue from the previous year, stating, and again I quote, the large river Tista, a small branch of which formerly ran through this district in a southeast direction, about the latter end of August, the previous year, suddenly altered its course and, leaving the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬𝑗𝑒𝑗 River almost dry, forced its way in a most astonishing manner into the small branch aforementioned, where, not meeting with a channel sufficiently large, it overflowed the whole of this district. The small branch that he mentions was sometimes in the maps referred to as the Tista Creek, sometimes as Buri Tista or Old Tista. So it was an older course of the Tista, which therefore did flow to the southeast, but then avulsed into a southerly direction to pass through 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬𝘮𝑗𝑒𝑗. This predated Rennell, who then surveyed the Tista in its southerly route. And after Rennell, in 1787, it jumps back again into a southeasterly course. We can actually see where this happened if we look at these larger scale district maps from Rennell's atlas. These two sheets that I've shown in this image are the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬𝘮𝑗𝑒𝑗 and 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 sheet on the left-hand side. This is 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 district with 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 town, the district capital. And this is the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 and 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬𝘮 sheet, with this being the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 district with 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 the district town. These two maps fit together. You can see from the fact that 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 and 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 have been identified on both sheets, but I've also put A, B, C in green to show that the bottom edge of the mapped area in the left-hand sheet is the top edge of the mapped area in the right-hand sheet. And you can see that the Tista emerging from the Himalayas, passing 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟, following the southerly route surveyed by Rennell towards 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟, and entering the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 district at around about B, and then splitting with one course going through 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 and the other travelling through the district in a due southerly direction. In order to identify where the 1787 avulsion took place, the next slide will show the left-hand 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 sheet on its left with an enlarged section of the area where the avulsion took place. So this is the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 sheet. The right-hand image here is the area shown by this rectangle. You can see the Tista here, passes 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟, travels to the south, exits the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 district towards 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟, and so on. What is interesting is that there's a settlement here called 𝘰𝑎𝑟𝑠𝑖 and on the left bank of the Tista, that is the true left bank, standing in the river with the water coming towards you from behind. On the left bank, there is a small distributary. This is the one that was described by McDowell in his letter, and it's labelled Tista Creek, and you can trace it. Its name isn't always the same. It's the Tista Creek here. It then becomes the 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟, but then it comes off the 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 and continues as the Tista Creek. The 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟 passes through 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟. This is the pre-Rennell origins, if you like, of the Tista. It had already avulsed into the southerly course before Rennell surveyed the area. Now it's avulsing back into that channel, which by then is too small to take the water, and as a result there's a lot of flooding. The consequence of this avulsion of the Tista was of some significance for the collector in 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝑃ℎ𝑎𝑟, Hatch, who was confronted with the fact that his river was drying up, and that made transport of goods by water almost impossible. He therefore sent his assistant, Hunter, to investigate in 1788, and on the 31st of May that year, Hunter wrote back to say, and I quote, "A bar is formed of large pebbles and quicksand intermixed with timbers of 20 to 30 feet long, the property of merchants. The bar appears to be 3 or 4 feet above the surface of the water." So it therefore seems that cut timber was awaiting transport down the Teesta on the riverbank. In a flood, it was washed into the river, and that then created a log jam which trapped sediment, raised the water level, and enabled it to escape into the Teesta Creek near Farsidunga, so that the Teesta was able to back into its old route. More correspondence follows the Revenue Board's hopes that the bar could be cut through with the aim of rerouting the river southwards again, both to relieve flooding in Rangpur and to re-establish water transport. But Hatch was reluctant and thought it would be cheaper to build embankments in Rangpur to protect the town there. In the end, for this and other reasons, nothing happened, and the Teesta has remained in the southeasterly course ever since. There is a second source of evidence that we can draw upon, and this is found in the handwritten notebooks of Francis Buchanan Hamilton, which were subsequently edited by Montgomery Martin in 1838. Buchanan Hamilton travelled in these districts between 1807 and 1811, using Reynolds maps as his guide. But he wrote, and I quote, "Since the survey was made by Major Rennell, the rivers of this district," this is Rangpur he's writing about, "have undergone such changes that I find the utmost difficulty in tracing them." We'll have a look at his map. In fact, Buchanan Hamilton made a very good stab at tracing the rivers and annotating his base map with the various changes that had occurred since 1787. These show that the Teesta is now following the route of the Teesta Creek as it was displayed on Reynolds' map, although obviously is enlarging and straightening that river because of the much larger amount of water that it's now carrying. However, it doesn't seem very likely that this avulsion of the Teesta had that much effect on the Brahmaputra. And the reason for saying that is that both the maps and the text of his diaries show that quite a lot of water entering this Teesta channel is deflected southwards by some of its distributaries, which are in many cases former channels that the enlarging river cut across when the avulsion happened. So, for example, the 𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘯𝘬 River, which passes through Rangpur, takes a lot of water from the Teesta channel, and the Manas or the Monash River, sometimes is written Monash, also takes a lot of water and then reconnects with the 𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘯. And all of that water and the sediment that is being transported by it bypasses the Brahmaputra. The Teesta does arrive at the Brahmaputra. It passes behind the town of 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬, which is in this map on the bank of the right bank of the Brahmaputra. But the amount of water and sediment reaching the Brahmaputra probably didn't have that much of an impact on the Brahmaputra itself. Indeed, the map suggests that it is still curving to the southeast with the town of 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘮 on its right bank, which is where it was in Reynolds' time. In fact, the most important additional thing which Buchanan Hamilton has to tell us is that the Brahmaputra is now feeding a river called the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘦𝘤𝘵, which is actually shown in blue on this map. And I can read a quotation from him. He says, "The Brahmaputra has made an eruption and gives a large supply of water to the lower part of the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘕, which now passes behind 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘯𝘕, scarcely inferior to the mighty river, and threatens to sweep across the whole intermediate country. It seems, therefore, that around 1810, the Brahmaputra was beginning to avulse itself without the aid of the Teesta, and would leave 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘯𝘕 on the left bank of its new course, which in fact is where it still is." So, in conclusion, we might suggest that the most that the Teesta does in accounting for the avulsion of the Brahmaputra is to show that the rivers of the Bengal Basin are perfectly capable of managing their own avulsions. The Teesta in late 1787, the Brahmaputra beginning to in 1810. Of course, external events like floods obviously help, because that's when river banks may be overtopped. For the Teesta, though, the East India Company itself seemed to be an additional external influence, merchants supplying timber providing the large woody debris that stalled on a river bar, helping to raise the water level. And there's always a channel on a fan surface to be fortuitously reoccupied. The Brahmaputra was migrating partly by a different process, riverbank erosion, especially on its right bank. This erosion meant that settlements like 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘬𝘰 were having to relocate westwards. By contrast, the town of 𝘤𝘰𝘯𝘰𝘯𝘰 was outflanked when the Brahmaputra's bank erosion caused it to avulse into the south-flowing 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘰 just north of the town. But that's a different story. I hope this talk has just shown you something of the natural complexity and dynamism of these rivers, and the value of archival research and old maps in uncovering some of their historical changes. Thanks for listening, and if you do have comments or questions, I'll try to answer them.